In this video, I'll go over the pros and the cons of Final Fantasy XIV, as well as what's been added this year and what's coming next year, so that you can hopefully answer the question of, should you play Final Fantasy XIV in 2023? So what's new in Final Fantasy XIV? The last expansion was Endwalker, which added two new classes, the Reaper and the Sage. One's a damage dealer and the other is a healer, both of which are a ton of fun. We also saw the addition of a new PvP mode and a new island sanctuary system. Think Farmville, but where you earn currency that you can convert into cosmetics. They also added variant and criterion dungeons, which completely mixed up the dungeon experience. If the dungeons were too easy for you before, definitely check out the new criterion dungeon. Endwalker was basically the conclusion of the original 10-year story arc, which has been playing out since the game launched. So what do we have to look forward to? Well, for one, in 2023, we continue to find out what happens after Endwalker and more about what the new story will be all about. We'll also see the addition of new extreme trials and 24-man raids. Perhaps the most exciting thing coming in 2023 will be the announcement of the next expansion, which is always an exciting time for the community. Also, we'll see the addition of a third deep dungeon. If you're familiar with Palace of the Dead or Heaven on High, they'll be adding a new one in 2023. If you're not familiar with this, think of it like a tower that you climb with increasingly difficult challenges on each floor. You can go in alone or with a group of up to 4 people. These can be a great way to level alts or to earn cool cosmetics and titles. Next, let's talk about combat. Final Fantasy XIV features tab target combat, so it's going to feel a lot more like World of Warcraft and a lot less like Elder Scrolls Online or New World. There are presently 20 jobs on offer in Final Fantasy XIV. Jobs are what any other MMO might call a class. It's worth noting that your job will determine if you're a tank, a healer, or a DPS, a spellcaster or a lance wielder, a sword and a shield, or a great axe. So yes, the game does feature the holy trinity of tank, healer, and DPS, and dungeons usually consist of 1 tank, 1 healer, and 2 DPS. At low level, the combat's very basic. Select the enemy and use your ability, but this quickly expands as you level up. You will unlock more abilities, more passives, as well as class gauges. These class gauges act as a sort of minigame that you play as you fight, creating windows where you do huge damage, pop long cooldowns, and fire off those big abilities. All of this to say that while the combat might feel a little slow early on, I promise it won't feel slow when you get to Savage content at the end of the game. Square Enix doesn't hold back when it comes to ability and spell animations. When you cast a spell, you absolutely get a sense that you're doing something truly amazing, as they have done a fantastic job of making each spell epic to watch. As expected, the higher you level, the more epic the abilities look. This serves to help your abilities feel more impactful, and rightfully so, and it makes them a lot of fun to use. Next, let's talk about the solo content in Final Fantasy XIV. Is there enough of it? Is it fun? Can you enjoy the game without going into it with a bunch of friends or without having a guild? And the answer is yes, absolutely. In fact, Final Fantasy XIV is the closest thing to a full-blown single-player RPG that you happen to play online, out of any MMO that I've ever reviewed. Before we dive further into the solo content, let me take a quick second to tell you about the sponsor of this video. Traha Global is an open-world action MMORPG based on the confrontation between 2 major factions. Much like Final Fantasy, the game allows you to use all types of weapons on one character. The weapon you choose will determine the abilities you have access to. The game features full character customization, allowing you to make your character look exactly the way you like. There is a ton of build customization with lots of different skills to choose between, as well as various morphs for each skill. On top of that, you can choose passives, cards, pets, and more to further customize your build to help you in all types of content that Traha Global has to offer. This content includes all of the things you expect from a great MMORPG, like questing, solo and group dungeons, world bosses, crafting, and various types of PvP. You can play Traha Global on your computer, or if you'd rather, you can boot it up on your phone and play it on the couch while you watch Netflix. It's available on Steam, on your PC, or in the App Store on your phone. Use my code Traha Global Lucky Ghost to receive 1,000 diamonds worth roughly $11, and try Traha Global for free right now using the link in the description below. Thanks for listening. Let's get back to the video. Square Enix will tell you, the story comes first. The RPG comes before the MMO. The story in Final Fantasy XIV is arguably the best out of any MMO out there. The entire game exists in service to the story. If you take the time to enjoy it, to read the quests, and to watch the brilliantly voice-acted cutscenes, there's no doubt in my mind that by the end of it, you'll love it as much as the rest of the player base. A lot of MMO players are used to the stories and the quest dialogue boxes being pure fluff or filler, so the hardest habit to break is simply skipping all of the dialogue. And I warn you, this will be tempting in the base game, because there is a lot, and I do mean a lot, of very dry dialogue. Though Square Enix has shaved a lot of hours off this content over the years to get you
into what is considered the best content sooner, and that would be the first expansion, Heavensward, and every expansion after that. If you've never cared about the story in a single player or multiplayer game before, well, then Final Fantasy XIV becomes a lot tougher of a sell, as much of the game is gated behind the story content. I've met a lot of people that heard that Final Fantasy had an incredible solo experience, and then they interpreted that as being the same as saying Final Fantasy XIV was devoid of group content. In other words, they think that because Final Fantasy XIV has a great solo MMO, it's a horrible group MMO, and they couldn't be more wrong. When it comes to group content, the only MMO that has anywhere near the amount of group content that Final Fantasy XIV does is World of Warcraft. I love Final Fantasy for the story, but I keep playing it long after I beat the story because of the group content. Final Fantasy XIV features an insane number of 4-player dungeons, 8-player trials and raids, and 24-player alliance raids. The dungeons are often on the easier side and part of the story, whereas the trials and raids allow you to choose extreme and savage and ultimate difficulties for the players who want the hardest challenges. The dungeons are amazing, each completely different from the last, and that was the part that impressed me the most. There are so many dungeons, and there is so much effort put into making each one feel like nothing like the last. The dungeons typically have 3 boss fights within, and they get more complex and interesting the further along you get. The final boss being an epic conclusion to the dungeon and the quest that brought you there. And upon slaying that final boss, you are greeted with an epic cutscene that seamlessly closes that mini story arc and begins the next. The 8-person content is my personal favorite part of the game. You spawn in standing in front of the boss that you're about to face off with. These are not just a boss fight, but an entire spectacle. The boss itself is epic, but it doesn't stop there. Each boss has its own incredible soundtrack. The bosses have multiple phases where not only does the boss change their appearance, but so does the entire stage. There are multiple difficulty levels that you can choose from in this type of content, allowing you to take on more and more difficult versions of your favorite fights for more interesting prizes. On the flip side, if you're more of a casual player, you can play through the easier version and still get the show without some of the punishing mechanics. Personally, the hard content is my favorite content in this game. As an MMO player that loves challenging group content, this game delivers tons of it. Not only is the group content fun, but it's incredibly rewarding. You can earn everything you'd hope for, like gear, cosmetics, pets, and insane mounts. The game also features 24-man raids, which are pretty easy and mostly there to service the story. They're really well built, have more incredible music and elaborate staging. These work more like traditional raids where you traverse a dungeon with a large group of players, killing monsters and bosses along the way until you reach the end and find yourself face to face with the final boss. These are very much tied into the story of the game, and the cutscenes that precede and follow them are always captivating. Now on to PvP. Final Fantasy does have PvP, but I definitely wouldn't say that it's the primary focus of the game. Whether you enjoy it or not will largely come down to whether or not you typically gravitate towards PvP in MMOs or not. So what type of PvP is there? Let's touch on each, starting with the newest addition, Crystal Conflict. It functions a lot like a push the cart map in Overwatch, with both sides battling it out and trying to push the crystal to their respective finish lines in order to win. Another mode is Frontline, which features 3 opposing teams of 24 players for a total of 72 players on the battlefield. Being that you are one of 72 players, this one can feel a bit like being tossed around in the ocean. You'll either love the massive scale of the conflict or lament how little your individual contribution matters. Ultimately, I think it's fair to say that Final Fantasy XIV is a PvE game that happens to have PvP. So with the addition of the new PvP content, Square Enix is making it clear they have not forgot about their PvP community. If you're someone that enjoys exclusively PvP in MMOs, there's probably better options out there. Next up, let's go over character customization. One of my favorite pastimes in any MMO is making my character look awesome. Final Fantasy XIV has a great character customization screen that allows you to choose from multiple races with tons of sliders that allow you to create a character unique to you. It's not groundbreaking, but it's solid and I've got no complaints with it. Where the character customization really shines is once you get in game. You will constantly be finding gear that looks better or worse than what you're currently wearing. When you find a cool cosmetic, such as a weapon cosmetic, you can save its appearance in your dresser and apply it to any weapon you put on thereafter. Essentially, it's just like the transmog system from WoW. Final Fantasy has no problem with your character looking any way you desire. It gives you a lot of freedom in deciding what you look like, and it provides a ton of avenues for you to go and earn these cosmetics in game. That's an important topic, and we'll come back to it because a common saying in MMOs is that fashion is the end game. A lot of other MMOs will sell you the best cosmetics in the cash shop, and then this entire end game experience is a hollow husk of what it's meant to be. Fortunately, Final Fantasy is not guilty of this. You can see a really cool weapon, and then you can go farm that really cool weapon, thereby causing your character to look legendary. Speaking of cosmetics that are a huge part of the MMO endgame, let's talk about mounts. One thing that always feels good in an MMO is earning that epic mount that you've wanted so badly. Final Fantasy has one of the strongest mount games in any MMO out today, with over 180 mounts that players can earn in-game. The scope and the variety of the mounts that you can earn in-game is just insane. Next, let's talk about the population health. All of this is well and fine, but if nobody's playing the game, It doesn't matter. How is Final Fantasy XIV's population? Well, it's massive. If we look at this chart, you can see that it's been trading places with WoW in terms of its popularity, Final Fantasy XIV and WoW being in a league of their own in terms of player-base sizes. Simply put though, Final Fantasy XIV is huge and it has one of the largest MMO populations in the world. You do not need to worry about this game dying anytime soon. Last but not least, let's talk about the all too important topic of monetization. It can take years to develop an MMO, but developers can destroy it overnight with bad monetization. Well, fortunately for Final Fantasy XIV, the game does not feature any pay to win. All of the coolest mounts and cosmetics are earned in game. Heck, you have to close the game and open up the browser to even look at the cash shop. There is no cash shop inside the game. They are also not creating problems and selling you the solutions. It's an incredibly refreshing change of pace from all of the over monetized games today. I have never once opened the cash shop, nor have I felt like I needed to. In fact, it's not uncommon for a player to not even know that the cash shop exists because they don't even put it in the game. Final Fantasy XIV is one of the truest, most unadulterated MMO experiences that I've had in a long time. My subscription gets me everything. Fortunately for Square Enix, this mentality of trying to make money by making a great game instead of by trying to extract money from their player base at every turn has resulted in the game being massively successful and loved by its community. Final Fantasy XIV has one of the most generous free trials of any MMO around. It lets you play through the entire base game and the first expansion for free. That's 60 levels and hundreds of hours of content before you have to spend a dime. The free trial does have some restrictions in place to prevent bots from abusing it, but all in all, it's a great way to try the game before you spend any money on it. These restrictions include things like not being able to whisper other players and having a capped amount of gil that you can earn. After the free trial, Final Fantasy XIV becomes a buy-to-play MMO with a mandatory sub. It does not feature any pay-to-win and has an incredibly fair cash shop. In summary, the story content is second to none, but it can be a bit heavy on the dialogue boxes that they want you to read. If I had my way, there'd be a lot more cutscenes and a lot fewer dialogue boxes. But this is mostly a base game problem, as what I just asked for actually starts to happen in the later expansions. The way that they weave dungeons and trials into the story and then close them out with a cutscene that leaves your jaw on the floor, I wish other MMOs would take note. This is how you write a story that leaves players wanting to quest for the story, rather than simply just doing the quest because it was the fastest way to level. The base game quests are definitely the slowest, with the story continuing to ramp up as you go along. Each expansion will undoubtedly have you more hooked than the one before it. Group content is amazing. While the dungeons and alliance raids are oftentimes too easy for my masochistic soul, the extreme, savage, and ultimate difficulty content is where I can go for a fun challenge. I like difficult things and I like to be punished when I fail mechanics, and the dungeons are in my opinion too forgiving in this regard. But with the addition of the Criterion dungeons, this might be starting to change. Fortunately for those of you who, like me, enjoy challenging content, Final Fantasy XIV has tons of it, and it happens to be my favorite content in the game. The 8-man trials and raids. The PvP in Final Fantasy is passable, but I haven't been blown away by it like I have with the PvE. I've tended to default to PvE and MMOs that separate PvP into a side minigame like Final Fantasy XIV does. And so the PvP for Final Fantasy XIV hasn't graduated past something I occasionally do for the daily reward. To be fair, this is largely because there's so much amazing PvE content constantly whispering sweet nothings into my ear. Maybe when I finish all of that, I'll sink more hours into PvP. The combat is great, and it really shines when you get out of your early levels and unlock your class gauge. Gameplay between classes feels genuinely different. Skill animations and limit breaks are just so beautifully made. There's so much effort put into them that you can't help but feel amazing while firing off your abilities. When you fire off a limit break, you'll think to yourself, hell yeah, that was my ability that did that. The game is not afraid to make you feel good. You're literally saving the world, and it makes sure you know it. The character customization in this game is amazing. You'll have no trouble creating a character you're excited about logging into. And best of all, you don't have to touch the cash shop to get the coolest cosmetics in the game. And yes, that includes mounts. So many earnable mounts. The monetization in Final Fantasy XIV is one of the best of any MMO right now. They don't abuse you with loot box gambling. They don't hide all the best cosmetics in the cash shop. They don't even put it in the game. You have to go seek it out. And there's not an ounce of pay to win in this game. Because of all of this, Final Fantasy XIV is one of the biggest MMOs out there, a shining beacon of what happens if you focus on making a good game first so that more people want to keep playing, instead of focusing on getting as much money out of your player as you can before they stop playing. Should you play Final Fantasy XIV in 2023? I think so. If you're looking for an MMO to play, why not? The first 60 levels are free. It's a great game. If you do decide to play the game, I've made one of the most thorough beginner guides mankind has ever seen. I'll link that down in the description below. You won't regret giving this game a chance because, hey, it costs you nothing. If you enjoyed this video, and if you're still here, you probably did, so please consider liking and subscribing so the algorithm senpai notices and loves me. Thank you so much for watching, and I hope to see you again soon. If you ever want to hang out with someone else who loves MMOs, be sure to swing by my stream over at twitch.tv/luckyghost. Massive shout out to my YouTube members who go above and beyond to support the channel. If you want to become a YouTube member, you get access to behind the scenes footage, exclusive Discord channels, and more. Click the join button below. If you're not sure what to do next, check out one of the videos popping up on screen right now.